Who's the second one?
The one of the chosen four, one of the great ones of Chinese Dota, Somnus, other better known from 2015 as maybe the greatest Chinese mid laner, the defining great player of the post-burning ROTK era.
Let me ask a setup question. Here's the setup question, right? Because if people don't know, this actually is one of my favourite players, if people don't know. And also, by the way, we'll get into it, but when we're talking about not winning TI, he did it by like the smallest margin imaginable, so it's also more brutal. But I will say this, there's a piece of setup to this story which goes, it's almost like this guy was an anime protagonist who was like, you know, the chosen one who's supposed to come, like you say, to be the next like burning Ferrari 430 type figure who's going to carry Chinese Dota to the top. Because there's even that crazy storyline, if people don't remember, where when he was in LGD, initially they moved him off to their like farm team. It's just a little team that became a team called CDEC, and after that went to second, and that was the team he was like playing with, and like he was like, you know, the star of it, and then he came back to the LGD team, and then famously for him, if you look again, individually, he has been mega, but the difference is, unlike the guy we just talked about, Ramses, this guy has an unbelievable amount of heartbreak runs at TIs, like where you do the top four run and everything's looking so, basically right before the match you lose, everything looks like they're going to win. Holy shit, they're going to win this. And always it's heartbreak with this guy, always. So go on, give me your side on it. Why is he on the list?
So maybe it's probably just the beginning of the modern mid lane player. The person who wasn't relying on specific picks, he wasn't relying on just draft advantages, he wasn't relying on people coming to his lane every single time. He was the original like Swiss Army knife, do-it-all mid lane player. This guy was famous on two like very diametrically opposed. So in 2015, it was known as the Storm Spirit versus SF meta, right? Okay, where you had the great Storm Spirit player of the era, who was Samael, and it was all about tempo play, assassinations, in your face, outplaying you. And then you had Arteezy, who was the SF, the Shadow Fiend, and that was all about lane domination, huge farm advantages, timing attacks, grouping with the teammate, and being an unstoppable frontline carry. Well, a little thing people forget is each of those players couldn't really play the other person's pick, but maybe could. Maybe was at the time probably the other great Storm Spirit player and the other great SF player of the era, and that was in 2015. And maybe it's still a top laning like mid laner now. He is still one of the best laning like players to this day, and he has been on a plethora, because people would say, oh, he's always on LGD. Yeah, he was always on LGD with lots of different teammates. In Chinese Dota, it is a revolving cast of like people, because people just retire, join another team, unretire, join another team. It's an absolute joke of a scene. And so when you look at outside of that, so in 2018, the year we just spoke about with VP, he actually managed to get two major wins. So he won one of the majors in that year. And he has 4 top 4 finishes at TI. And then 3 of those, they lost to the eventual champion. So he lost to the Evil Genius team of 2015. He lost to OG, obviously, in the 2018 finals. And he also lost to, I can't remember the other one, but he lost to another one, and I think again it was on LGD. I think it might have been 2017 when they lost to TL. He has defined an era and a change in Dota all in himself. He is dominant to a degree that it cannot even be like joked about. Almost every single like team has to think about maybe in like draft. He is one of those like specialized players where he will garner bans unto himself. And what a little thing that a lot of people don't really give credence for is how hard it is to consistently be good in Dota every single year to year, no matter what changes around you. He did have a little period where he retired and he wasn't really, well, not so much retired, but he wasn't actively playing as much. But his like form across the board is an absolute joke. For example, I very rarely see like maybe getting like crushed in lane, like multiple solo kills. He very rarely loses his team, and to beat him, you have to play to like levels that are and a standard of Dota that is borderline not sane. Like what OG had to do to conquer maybe in that or Somnus in that TI final was unbelievable. Like how much he wanted to win that final and how well he was playing that final was it was crazy. It's probably one of the singular greatest losses by a player, like in a final, and he's one of those folk where the other star players on his team really did let him down. Unfortunately, he was a victim of Ame having a TI collapse. FY, who was like his coordinated partner in crime, the great Chinese support player, his picks kind of got figured out. OG managed to begin to do drafts that they were able to neutralize other players and make them less effective, but they had to beat Maybe. Like, they had to beat him in the actual server. I'd be hard pressed to not have him on the list. I think because, and this is a scary thing, outside of his major wins, he actually only has 2 tier 1 land wins. So if you go on Wikipedia, they like stratify the importance of tournaments by tiers. So like TI and major are tier 1s. But outside of that, he only actually has 2 other tournament wins. But it's just a plethora of like top placings, and it's actually just the consistency of his plays, because all throughout his career he didn't always have the best teams, but when he did have like good teams, like he made up a massive proportion. If anyone wants to see an example, go watch him be eliminated on RNG last year from TI. It takes the enemy team 110 minutes to destroy the base because he just won't lose the game. That is like how much he was like just holding on to it for.
On the point you made about the, obviously we're talking about TI8, the famous one where OG and then played the amazing upper bracket final and then the final. By the way, these are 2 matches where if you even vaguely like DOTA 2, you've never seen them, like maybe you're a modern day fan, go back right now and watch them. Literally, they are 2 of the best matches ever played. They're insane. Like, everything's awesome about them. But the problem is, I'll give the obvious contrast, because obviously since you're from my Discord, we know like what each person's into. The joke of that run of PSG is it's like the one where a few years ago in the English Premier League, Liverpool came second, but the amount of points they had meant like every season except 2 or something, they would have been first by far because they had like 98 points or something absurd that like... So essentially, I would say the same thing about that PSG LGD team. The way they played in a second place loss, dude, was better than some of the teams I saw win TIs in past years. Like, it was insane how good those matches were. Like, they really were like example of like teams just pushing each other to the limit, and he was fucking sick, like you say. This isn't one like he blew the game, like, I fumbled it, like you say, it was other people, and in fact, people like Army was sort of like, people already knew that was in their arsenal, that they could just fuck up a game like that and just have times where they fell apart. And even that angle you said earlier of like, people will try to be like, yeah, but it was just on LGD. Bro, there's none of the players from 2015 or in fucking 2018. What are you talking about? Like, yeah, here's the difference. LGD 2015 has loads of legendary players that you know, of course, like some of the greatest players. The one in 2018, the joke is they're becoming famous in this team. They were some like the greatest players of all time. So really, he is the defining factor. And I'm with you. Like, his consistency is bonkers. Like, as far as I can tell, he's one of those players that actually is a bit frustrating in DOTA, where it's like either what teams they choose to join or not join, or if they just feel like retiring, they take themselves out of the servers, the joke keeper. Like, no one ever actually stops them in the game. They just choose to not play, or to play for some shitter team, or to be on the outskirts in some like 7th best team. Like, I feel like, to me, I know what you mean about the resume. I haven't actually got that many trophies, but like in terms of like body of work, I mean, he easily makes this list for me. He's mega. Like I say, I thought the TI run, that is the most heartbreaking one ever for me. I know he's had a lot of them, like he's had a lot of the top 4 ones, like you say, but that particular TI8 one, especially because, I'm just going to say this, right? Even though OG won the next year, they won in totally different fashion. I don't think OG ever played like that before or after, mate. Like, that was the craziest, like, you know, like I joked that they sold their souls or something to win that one. It was ridiculous how they won that.
Yeah. And the thing is you can almost go as like a through line through like maybe his career, and you will see like ups and downs. But what is so crazy is like you even look at like his like down periods, and great thing about Dota is you can actually like watch like matches like live in the client,
yes,
and you can see like what people are like clicking and what they're doing. Even if you like go like watch like the not so great like games, or like the times when his like team's not losing, you can still see that individually he is like an amazing like player, and he was playing in like an ultra competitive period of like China, you have to remember maybe was still one of the guys that caught the second rise of like the newbie team with like Hal when he came out of retirement and things like that. So he's played like a long time. He actually only has like one, apart from the fact that like he didn't get more LAM wins, which is like an afterthought because sometimes you can be circumstanced. The one team I think not so much he blew it, but it's because he was the kind of the figurehead of the team. He created a super team called Elephant Gaming, and it had Paparazzi, himself, FY, and Super on it. And they had made a run at like TI, and individually he played like pretty good at that TI, and he like his individual game was fine, but that team not working was probably arguably like one of the last like great chances like he had. Funnily enough, he is actually at this TI yet again. He was the benefactor of the Chinese qualifier, so he is here once again with his partner in crime, FY, going to attempt to make another run at it. But I would say they're on a much outsider's chance than any other year,
right?
And I'm not so sure they've got the PCs that are required to make it through, because the PI format changes have made it a bit more like rigorous, getting from like stage to stage to stage. But focusing maybe on who that, and that's where I would kind of move them away from Ramses. Whereas in the Ramses teams in that had failures, maybe actually at TI, having not even won it, might be one of the best TI performers. It just and the end result, because
just aggregate over how many times he went and stuff.
Yeah, just the end result just didn't get him there.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean by that. It's like famously, even before Simple and CSGO won the major, I used to say I actually already was the best player at majors, because if you ever went and looked, it's kind of like what I said earlier about the amount of people who have a TI and then what else do you have in the cabinet? Like, the real problem is there's a lot of people that have won TI and then they had a bunch that were like whatevers after that. Like, if you finished 13th place every time, like the actual like sheer number of times this guy had a real crack, and it's ridiculous, right? The last question I have is this: if you take all the resume stuff off the table, you only like nameplate off, you're just looking at the player DOTA for his whole career, would he, forget this, would he be like near the top of an all-time best players ever to play DOTA, at least from a carry role?
From mid?
Or mid, yes, mid.
Yeah.
By the way, that's the other problem if you're a league fan. I've been carried just as in you are one of the players who metaphorically carries the game, not specifically the one position. Yeah, sure.
No, because he actually does play like that. He's one of those guys that, like, for example, he plays like the Morphling, which is the dual people. Outside of anything in the game, just what goes on in the game, he might be a candidate for the best player of all time. He's one of the people you put on on a list. He probably is. Like,
because what you said earlier, I think, is actually quite apt as well. People really underestimate, if they're not from DOTA, specifically from the carry roles 1 and 2 position, it's very rare that people put together like 5 or 6 year runs of being like super insane. Like, in fact, the joke is half the time you have to like transition to be a bloody offlane and then eventually support. Once you lose your hands, don't you? That's what everyone does. So like, that's the part that I think's mad underrated, because when you start putting together that little list like you're doing there, Kira, the joke is, this is also why I think RTC like in some ways is overrated and underrated. Like, again, he would be on that list as well, because look how many fucking years he's done it for. So see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.